बाकी सारे ऐप हमको कांच की दुकान लगते हैं। मीशो लगता है कि हमारा अपना बाजार है।
Flipkart, Amazon, Meesho. Why should there be three of them? And what is their reason for right to exist, if I can call it that way?
In a country of 1.4 billion people, where the income disparity is also very significant, it's very hard for one commerce platform to serve all of their needs.
What is very counterintuitive is companies profitable, but it's a zero commission revenue model, right?
Commission is like the tax that sellers pay to be on an e-commerce platform, right? If you are able to bring it down or make it zero, then it can be a very disruptive proposition. The big path-breaking 0 to 1 products tend to be more art than science. And that's why in the 0 to 1 phase of any startup, people call it black magic.
What advice will you give to, let's say, somebody who's coming from large company wanting to join a startup?
So there's no right or wrong answer, but just saying that, okay, the mission of this startup, like, do I find it interesting?
If one were to pick one decision that had a positive business impact, what would those be? It all started in 2007 when Flipkart started the e-commerce revolution. 6 years later, we saw Amazon enter the industry. And then a couple of years later, Meesho, the third large player. And today, if you see India's e-commerce market, close to 80% of the market is cornered by these three companies. Today, we have among us Kirti Varun, who has seen it all. Kirti started his career at ITC after his undergrad at IIT. Then he did MBA from ISB. Spent few years at McKinsey, about 6 odd years building the fintech practice, and then had a career at Amazon, Flipkart, and then last 4 years as a CPO of Meesho. So thanks, Kirti, for coming on the show. Really appreciate you spending time with us.
Great to be here, Rahul.
So Kirti, what we'll do is we'll walk through some of your journeys, and I'm sure there are so many interesting things to learn given that you have seen it across the three large companies. So starting with Meesho, this is the only profitable e-commerce, horizontal e-commerce platform in the country, and one of the fastest growing. There was a recent report also on how, in terms of mobile downloads and MAUs, it has now surpassed the other large e-commerce platforms. Tell us a little bit about, when you joined, I think around 2020, early 2020, to the growth that the platform has seen, the decisions that were taken, and how it became profitable.
Yeah, I think the last 4.5 years at Meesho has been incredible. I think, like you mentioned, early 2020 is when I joined. And if I go back in time, then Meesho actually was a social commerce platform. It wasn't a B2C e-commerce platform like it is today. Our main model was reselling, where we were helping these reselling entrepreneurs earn income by sharing items on the Meesho app with end customers, right? So that was the business model. And we had pretty good market fit. I think we used to do maybe about 1 lakh orders a day, right? So that was the time. But in 2020, like all of us know, COVID happened. And obviously the entire business came to zero because non-essential deliveries were not allowed. And once I think the lockdown started lifting, we saw a lot of organic traction happen on the Meesho app. And that continued for about 5-6 months. And we were wondering that, hey, why is the business growing so fast? It was growing much faster than before COVID. And when we went to sort of talk to customers, looked at our data, we found something very, very interesting, that a lot of end customers were coming and directly buying from the Meesho app, even though the app was never built for them. It was an app for resellers who could share items. And the premise of building the app earlier was that, hey, there are a lot of the end customers who are not comfortable buying online. That's why they need resellers to assist them. But that paradigm changed after COVID. And as we saw these data points, we were very surprised. And then we said, hey, is there a big insight here because of which end customers are directly buying? And when we went and spoke to customers, and these are in all the rural parts of the country, I myself traveled along with the team. We heard some very interesting things. I think one anecdote, which I'll use Hindi now, because it captures the essence very well, is I asked the customer, hey, आप क्यों मीशो से खरीद रहे हो? आपको Amazon, Flipkart और बाकी ऐप से ये सामान नहीं मिल रहा है क्या? And that person said, बाकी सारे ऐप हमको कांच की दुकान लगते हैं. मीशो लगता है कि हमारा अपना बाजार है, right? And this captures actually the essence of the core value proposition of Meesho, which is all of the selection that we had, which was long tail, unbranded, at low price points, was something that was appealing to these end customers a lot compared to what was available on other commerce platforms. And because COVID created that tailwind of these customers being forced actually to adopt digital commerce compared to offline retail, a lot of them discovered Meesho organically through word of mouth from other people and started downloading them, started using them. Even though the app interface was not meant for customers, they still struggled through it and still made purchases, right? And once we realized that, look, we have this kind of selection on our platform and this value proposition is resonating with this Bharat consumer, right? Which is typically tier 2 and beyond, low to mid income, people who sort of a big part of is blue collar workforce, right? So these kinds of people organically found sort of traction with the app. And once we discovered this insight, then we said, look, can we change our business model to become a B2C e-commerce company? Because the total addressable market for a B2C e-commerce company is much, much larger than a reselling commerce company. And we said, look, there is a big opportunity waiting here. I think the other commerce players have never focused on it much. So can we do this, right? And that's when, and this was in early 2021, is when we said, okay, let's now sort of almost pivot the entire company. So we changed our mission to democratize internet commerce. We changed our entire marketing strategy to saying, hey, instead of coming to Meesho and earning income as a reseller, now it is more about come to Meesho and buy things at the lowest price which are meant for you, right? So we changed that. We redesigned the entire app from a reselling e-commerce journey to an actual customer shopping experience like you would see in a B2C app. So we did all of those things, and then we relaunched sort of the new Meesho app with the new marketing strategy. This was around mid-2021. And since then, I think the business started growing very fast, and all of the hyper growth that Meesho has experienced largely was after that big shift that we did. And once we did that shift, this hyper growth happened that continued for about a year and a half. And we sort of saw this massive downloads. We were, I think, the most downloaded e-commerce app in the world in 2021, right? Massive.
If I can take a pause, you said we took a call because we saw some data. What was the tipping point? As in, what percentage of customers without you doing any change to the business model were still like the consumer, the B2C consumer? Was there a certain tipping point of number of people who were already buying which made you think?
Yeah, no, it's a good data point to look at. So I think before we sort of went into this shift, if I look at our business, almost upwards of 95% was reselling. There was a few consumer orders here and there that used to happen. After sort of the COVID lockdowns got lifted and maybe 6 months after that, this share dramatically changed, right? So almost 35-40% consumer orders were coming, even though we sort of never even meant it to be, right? So that itself gave us a lot of confidence. Also, a lot of these consumers were also buying frequently as well. So retention also was pretty good. And then we said, look, without us doing anything, if this is how it is, then if we completely change the app, change the value proposition, etc., then it's going to be even stronger, right? So that data point, along with a lot of the anecdotes from customers, built a lot of confidence.
When you made this call, one is a question around product. Given that you were heading product, what would you say are the top few changes you had to do to make it look like My Bazaar versus Kaanch Ki Dukaan?
Yeah, no, there are many different elements in the Meesho app which exist even today. I think there are a few big things compared to the traditional e-commerce that Meesho personifies. I think one is a lot of the app is very browsing-led versus search-led. If you see, classically, e-commerce has always been that, hey, a customer has an intent to buy something, that person comes and searches for it, and then they see a bunch of results, and then they add to cart and buy, right? That's been the shopping journey. Whereas a lot of these Bharat consumers come to the Meesho app without any intent in mind. So that's why our usage of search is much lower than the browsing that people do organically. So therefore, there are a lot of feeds on the app everywhere. There are a lot of recommendation constructs that we build to channelize their intent when people are browsing. So it's a very browsing-driven e-commerce. I think that's one big difference. I think the second big difference is this consumer segment also is very different from your metro segment in the sense that they're not time-starved. They're not like your millennials, right? Which means that they have time on hand, and they also like to be engaged on the app. So which means a lot of Meesho's experiences on the app are also gamified. There is more of those elements built in as well. compared to again what you see in other traditional e-commerce apps. So we invested a lot in that and that became a differentiator. Then the other big differentiator, which I think the technology team worked on quite a bit, was to also make the app very light to download. Because again, these consumers are using low-end phones and they have limited data on their phone. So this is actually still the lightest e-commerce app on Google Play Store, right? So I think there are a bunch of these things from a product and tech standpoint that we did in the beginning itself to ensure that this app is meant for Bharat, and it is not like a traditional e-commerce app which we have given to these consumers, right? And that's also one of the reasons why there's a lot of natural affinity that these consumers had.
Got it. So sorry for the interruption. You're talking about the high growth.
Yeah, so the high growth phase was great, and I think when a company goes through hyper growth, then you sort of rewire the company in every way, right? So hiring lots of people, spending a lot on marketing to get more and more consumers. I think in 2021, probably we were one of the largest marketing spenders in the country in terms of digital marketing. So all of that sustained for a while. And then in 2022, like, you know, the market turned, the macro environment changed. And then while the company was still doing well, we realized that, look, now we have to shift from this growth at all costs to becoming profitable while still having good growth, right? So that was a very difficult shift, as you can imagine. And it required us to sort of change the way the company operates. We had to restructure, make the company leaner. We had to consolidate the product portfolio and not try too many new things and focus on the core much more. We also had to reduce the amount of marketing spend and focus more on organic growth channels, right? So we did a lot of that, and also build in more financial discipline in the company in general, not towards all costs, right? The cost of tools that you use and everything else that goes into running a company. So we did all of these things, and then in 2023, last year, towards I think September, we also became PAT profitable, right? Nice. Which was one of the goals that we had. And even as we achieved that, the growth was still close to 25%.
Nice.
So the top line growth was healthy. We also became PAT profitable. And now we're at a place where we are solidly positioned to hopefully go IPO in some time.
Very nice.
So it's been a very interesting journey of highs and consolidation both.
Yeah. And I think there was, at one point of time, there was some right sizing of the company that also happened.
Yeah.
How was that decision taken? And there always this question when founders want to take that call. They're not sure whether they should do it all in one go. Should they do a small amounts every few months to get to the right size of the business? How did you guys take that call? Which call did you take first of all, and why?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think once the market turned, it was a tough time. We had to consolidate and become disciplined. Also in 2023 of last year, May, I think is when we did a restructuring layoff exercise. And before we did that, like we were debating a lot of what you mentioned about how to do it, and should we do it in smaller chunks over a longer period of time, or should we do all at once? And after a lot of debate, I think we came to the conclusion that, look, we have to ensure that we do it once, and we do it to the extent after which, at least for the foreseeable future, we don't feel a need to do it, which means a deeper sort of cut at once versus sort of a lot of smaller cuts. And the other benefit of doing that we felt also was that that will also, while it'll be painful at that time, the company also can see beyond that in a shorter period of time. Versus if you do it multiple times and there's a constant sense of anxiety, fear, uncertainty. So that's the call we took. And then I think in hindsight, it was probably the right decision, because once we did that, and there was a temporary lull in the company and etc. But after that, we moved beyond it very quickly. And since then to now, again, the company has come back to the growth trajectory. We are growing even faster now than last year, and we continue to be profitable as well. So I think overall, I think it's been quite good going since then. But yeah, that period was tough.
Interesting. What is very counterintuitive is companies profitable, but it's a zero commission revenue model, right? And there are very few companies in India, almost I don't know if any e-commerce company on the western side of the world. And obviously there are examples like Taobao with Alibaba, which are on zero commission. What was the rationale to do that? And despite all of that, how is it that the company is profitable?
Yeah. No, that's another interesting decision that we took at Meesho. I think going back to that B2C shift that I mentioned, that once we did that, the consumer demand started growing a lot, but we realized that we didn't have enough supply. And then we started trying to understand that problem, saying, hey, what can we do to get more supply onto the platform? And a lot of this supply was, again, had to be very different from what's there in the other commerce platforms. And then we realized that, look, to get a lot of that supply, we need to have very strong value proposition towards the sellers, right? And if you had to get a lot of supply very quickly, then that value proposition had to be very disruptive, right? Something which sort of compels a lot of sellers to start putting their supply onto the platform. And that's when we said, hey, can we go 0% commission? Because commission is like the tax that sellers pay to be on an e-commerce platform, right? So that's the biggest cost of doing business. So if you're able to bring it down or make it zero, then it can be a very disruptive proposition. And 0% always has that strong proposition attached. It's like no questions asked, 0%, right? And there are parallels to this in Southeast Asia, like you mentioned, but not so much in the Western world. And it was a big decision, but we said, let's take the decision. And when we took the decision, we also realized that, look, our revenue, therefore, has to come from somewhere else. And we started investing in other revenue streams. Advertising is something that we just launched at that time when we made this decision. We didn't have an advertising product in the till then. So we said, okay, advertising is something we can invest in, and especially in a long tail marketplace which is unbranded, advertising has a very high potential, because one seller's inventory has to stand out compared to others, and there is no brand on anybody's name, right? So discovery through ads is the biggest way. So we said, okay, look, ads has a big potential, and some of this was validated in Southeast Asia as well. So we said we can do that. And second is fulfillment revenue is anyway something that we can keep getting because of shipping the seller's items to the customer's doorstep. So that sort of was the other revenue source. So fulfillment revenue and advertising revenue are the ones that help us make overall revenue. And that's what has sustained us in the last few years, and it's growing very strong. And now we've come into new revenue streams, which you can talk about as well, like financial services, etc., which are still nascent. But I think these are the two ones which help us get revenue even with 0% commission.
Got it. Recently, I heard like Rapido, I think early this year also moved to the zero commission subscription-based model. Are there other categories you think in India which are well suited for zero commission and other forms of revenue kind of a model? Any thoughts? Or what characteristics allow for that? Like you talked about unbranded supply.
See, 0% commission is a disruptive value proposition, which I think has applicability in almost all marketplaces. The question is, whenever there's an entrenched marketplace with a few players who are charging this 25-30% commission, if a new disruptor comes in, this is actually one of the ways in which they can disrupt. So one good example, which hasn't happened in India, but maybe somebody can do it, is it food delivery. So if you see food delivery marketplaces are charging 20-25%. Now even quick commerce are charging so much. So if a new quick commerce company or a food delivery company wanted to take away share from all of these people, I think one of the strategies they can try is 0% commission, but they have to make the other revenue sources work as well. So in any marketplace where you have entrenched competitors charging a lot of commission, a new entrant could always use this as a hook. Also, it is also relevant in places where supply is sort of fragmented and tough to get onto the marketplace. So that's where this disruptive proposition also has hold. But definitely mobility, food delivery, quick commerce, all of these, I think.
We'll come back to quick commerce. But before that, given that you have seen three different kind of entities, all three of them have their place in the e-commerce space in India: Flipkart, Amazon, Meesho. Can you give us some insight as to why should there be three of them, and what is their reason for right to exist, if I can call it that way? Do they target different audience? Do they service different needs? If you can just share your insights on that.
Yeah, I've wondered about this, and I've spent more time in this industry. I've come to realize that I think the main reason is the heterogeneity of needs. And that actually ties back to the demographics of the country. If you see in a country of 1.4 billion people where the income disparity is also very significant and geographic disparity is significant, the languages they speak are significantly different. So when all of that is there, it's very hard for one commerce platform to serve all of their needs, right? And the best example to look at on this is China, right? China, again, similar sort of population size, similar geographic disparity, and also income segment distribution. There you have Alibaba, you have Pinduoduo, you have Jerry.com, right? All of these three are large, but independently exist and they've done very well. However, this is not the case in the West. If you look at US, much more homogeneous population. Income disparity is not as much. That's why Amazon can rule it all there. But in India, I think you will always have a market structure which will have maybe 3, 4 big players do well, right? So that's the sort of broader view. If you come to the specifics of it, I think like the Meesho segment is the Bharat segment, right? So their income, it is low to mid income. They also geographically are in different sort of places. Their local needs are very different. And that is what Meesho is serving. Whereas if you see Amazon and Flipkart, they started with serving the metro tier 1 consumer segment a lot, convenience focused, not so much value conscious type segment. Now these companies are also foraying into the Bharat segment because the opportunity is large. So everybody tries to do everything, but in reality, all of them will end up at an equilibrium where they're serving different needs, and that sort of tends to be the case. And it's also driven by the nature of the industry, because this is e-commerce where you're buying things. Buying is determined by how much income you have. Whereas there are other user needs which can be very universal in nature. To give you an example, messaging. The richest person in India and the poorest person in India can all use WhatsApp, because your messaging need is much more universal. It is not linked to your demographics and income so much, whereas commerce is not like that. And that's why in e-commerce sense, you'll always have three big players, whereas in a social network or messaging, maybe that's less so.
Interesting. And coming back to obviously the elephant in the room, the quick commerce, as in, I had seen it at Big Basket on how shorter delivery timelines are becoming interesting and important. And now, you have clearly grocery-oriented quick commerce platforms. They are selling non-grocery items. And of late, over the last 6-8 months, we as investors have received a lot of, proposals or business ideas around, let's say, quick commerce for fashion. Given that Meesho has been like one of the category definers on the fashion side for the Bharat population, any views on, you think over time, quick commerce for fashion, like, is that like sound like a viable idea, good idea, bad idea?
Yeah, quick commerce, I think, has taken everyone by surprise in the last few years. I think when they launched and started finding traction, people said, hey, why would you want anything in 10 minutes? Forget about fashion. But I think that they've created the consumer need, they're serving it well, and that they're also trying to get into the traditional e-commerce and disrupt it. I think what I've understood about quick commerce is there are a few ingredients which make quick commerce happen in the first place, right? I think first is high demand density in a particular geography, right? So which means you have lots of consumers who are closely located, who have a certain income level to even order, right? So that is one necessary ingredient. The second necessary ingredient is the things that they're ordering need to be fast moving in terms of inventory, right? Which means predictable demand, which is moving fast, so that the dark house, the dark store in which a quick commerce company keep the inventory, that can get replenished very fast, right? So high demand density and quick moving inventory, right? These are two pillars on which quick commerce has been built. Now, if any of these two pillars are not there, is when I think it's going to be harder, right? For example, of all the categories that you have, long tail fashion is the one which has the most unpredictable inventory, right? Of all the e-commerce categories. Whereas grocery is on the other extreme, where predictable inventory, especially if you keep the head SKUs there. So my at least belief is, in the long tail fashion, probably quick commerce will not be able to disrupt e-commerce, at least based on the current model they have. But even within fashion, if there is some head SKUs or items which sell very fast, like maybe a white t-shirt which everybody buys all the time, or there are some limited SKUs, some specific brands and so on, so then maybe it is possible. But I see a bigger disruption happening in other categories where the concentration of head SKUs, as we call it, fast moving inventory is higher. For example, mobile phones, because you have only 3-4 brands and they'll move fast. Or some consumer electronics. So those are the ones where quick commerce can eat into the e-commerce market share faster. Fashion, I think, will be the last, right? So at least in the current model. Now, something may change in the future, but that's how I see it.
Got it. Now, if we take, back few years during your Flipkart days, at that time, I remember like in 2015, 16, there was this whole battle between Flipkart and Amazon. So if you have to reflect back on those 2-3 years at Flipkart, what role did you play in, helping Flipkart win against Amazon?
I think Flipkart versus Amazon has always been a competitive sort of landscape in India. I think in 2017 is when I joined Flipkart, and at that time, actually Amazon was gaining share at the expense of Flipkart, very different from what the situation looks today. And Amazon Prime, I think, had launched about a year before that, and in India. Before that, Amazon didn't have Amazon Prime. So they launched that, and that actually was a very disruptive value proposition. A lot of consumers signed up, and they were also getting Prime Video and other things along with free fast shipping. So that was creating a dent. And at Flipkart, I think we saw that, look, our customer retention was actually not very strong. A lot of consumers were coming only for the discount, buying during BBD and not buying for the rest of the year. So we saw a lot of that sort of in our data. And then we said, look, we have to find a way to counter this quote unquote loyalty that Amazon was driving through Prime. And then we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, how do we do this? And should we create a loyalty program? If yes, what kind of loyalty program should it be? Should we also launch our own subscription program like Prime? I think there are a lot of those discussions happening. Then I think after a lot of discussion, debate, research, we said that, look, we also want to be differentiated against Amazon. While we want to drive loyalty, we also don't want to do the same thing at what Amazon has done. Plus, also, we don't want to do it in a manner in which the value-conscious segment of consumers, even in metros, etc., for them, Flipkart becomes the default e-commerce platform. And then we said, if you have to do that, then we shouldn't be charging a subscription, because that will become a barrier for a lot of people to participate in this loyalty program. Why don't we think of what we call an earned loyalty program, which is where you make purchases, you earn some currency, and we called it super coins then. And then you can redeem that on Flipkart and outside of Flipkart as well, right? Like on Myntra and also in the other retail ecosystem. And that actually will create this very strong lock-in effect, where as people get this currency, then they feel you have to spend that currency here or outside, or you can go outside and also earn currency and spend here, right? So we created that program, which was quite unique, and that actually helped improve the consumer retention on Flipkart a lot. And then I think by end of 2018, early 2019, that entire market shares losing story actually changed a lot. Obviously, other factors played into it as well, and not just this program. But I think just building that entire program from scratch, scaling it, it also became one of the fastest growing loyalty programs in any e-commerce platform. So that actually was a good success, which helped change the fortunes of Flipkart in some ways. And then since then, they've built on it, and today they're much more dominant than Amazon in India.
We earlier talked about how, from a customer point of view, these three entities, Flipkart, Amazon, Meesho, provide different value. As an insider in the company and being there in all three companies, how do you think the structure of the org, the culture of the org, even the PM org design, how was it different across these three business models?
Yeah, I think all the companies share some similarities but many differences, right? I think I'll tell you what is probably similar. The fact that they're all e-commerce companies, and also the fact that all of them are fairly customer focused, right? In terms of understanding needs, trying to solve for them. So I think that part is pretty common in all three companies. The differences, I think, are on few axes. I think one is just the size and the leanness of the organization, right? So Meesho obviously is very, very lean relative to the scale. Whereas I think Flipkart and Amazon are much larger, which means that Meesho is able to be much more agile, move fast to launch things, also course correct quickly based on what's happening in the market, whereas the other two companies are larger and find it harder to change their course. So I think that is definitely one big difference. I think the other big difference, and this may is relevant more to Amazon than to Meesho or Flipkart, is it's also because it's a global company. The decision making for Amazon India is not fully in India. There are some parts which are in India, especially on the product development side, but many are in the US. For example, Amazon Search. If a product manager in India wanted to change a lot to serve the Indian market, it's very hard for them because the search is a global product. So you can only make incremental changes to it, but even for those, you'll have to take lots of alignments, etc. So it automatically makes things slower. So I think being a global product versus being built locally, I think is another thing which affects the speed of product development. Also culturally of these companies, Meesho is I feel the boldest, right? When I say boldest, what I mean is because it is founder driven, which the other two companies are not. We can also take bigger risks, like the B2C shift we spoke about. That's a very big shift, right, for any company to do. You're abandoning your core business and jumping into something completely new. So being founder driven also makes you bolder in terms of taking these bigger bets and rallying the entire organization towards a vision. That actually, Meesho, obviously, it's possible more than maybe in Flipkart, Amazon. So I think these are some differences which I think have defined how these companies have emerged till now.
Got it. I also, want to go back slightly more in history. McKinsey, 5 years fintech, and then you decided to join Amazon, right? First of all, what exactly was going in your mind, wanting to jump ship, even if you decided to buy financial services to e-commerce, also from being a consultant to a product manager. So I'm sure there was a lot of technology understanding needed. Just walk us through that decision making.
Yeah, this was, I think in 2015 is when I made that decision. I was in McKinsey for 5.5 years before that. I think there are a few reasons. One, I think, is once you're a consultant for a long enough period of time, I think you start feeling the itch to actually build something, own something where you can directly see the impact of what you do versus being on the advisory side. So that is something I started to feel more and more after spending some time. I think the second part also was at that time in 2015, etc., is when the tech landscape in India was taking off. Like the global companies had set up shops in India, startups started growing. So that was also something that seemed very exciting from the outside, saying, hey, how do I participate in this technology landscape, which is going to define India for many decades? And that's turned out to be true. So I wanted to sort of get into a technology company, right? And I wasn't clear about product management as much at that time. I had heard about it. I spoke to some people who said, hey, product manager role can be interesting for somebody with consulting background, but it was very superficial understanding. So I sort of said, look, Amazon is a great tech company. It's also one of those companies open to hiring consultants in a product manager role. So why don't we sort of jump into it and see, and then we'll figure out. If we don't like that, then maybe I'll do something else. So that sort of was a decision making. So not really very scientific at that time. But I think once I came into that role, I realized that, look, it's very different from consulting in many ways. I think the biggest difference, I would say, is more a mindset skill, which is the fact that you're an owner, you're accountable. You can't just give advice, especially when you're building product. It has to work in the real world every second of the day, right? It's not something that you just think about at a high level. So a lot of depth and getting your hands dirty, I think, is one definite difference from consulting. Technology understanding, like you mentioned, is the other one. There, at least, I feel that it's not as hard to pick it up, at least the basics of it, which can help you understand what you're building, have productive discussions with software engineers and so on. Now, that also depends on the nature of the product. If you go into something which is very technical, like a cloud product, maybe you need more technical understanding. Maybe it'll take more time for you to ramp up. But any product which is much closer to the business, like e-commerce is, the technology part is not that complex for a product manager to pick up. At least that's my personal experience. So I was able to spend some time, etc., and get that. I think the tougher skill I realized is actually discovering what problem to solve. The ambiguity associated with data telling you something, when you talk to customers, they'll tell you something else. Then you look at outside and what other companies have done, they have done something else. So synthesizing all of these different sets of inputs, which are all ambiguous in nature, into something cohesive and then build a product around it, I felt this is the hardest part. And this is a skill, I think it's taken time for me also to make lots of mistakes and learn over time. But in essence, I think that transition from consulting to product management in hindsight, I think was probably the right thing for me. But at the time, I think these were some of the things that I was grappling with.
I also made a similar transition. I was at BCG, joined a software company called I2 as a PM. Like one of the, and I don't know how you dealt with it, would love to get your views, was that at consulting firms like BCG, McKinsey, you are dealing with CXOs, CEOs of large companies.
Yeah.
So there is this high, if I can call it, of working on important looking problems.
Yeah.
As a PM, you are part of a large company working on a product, on a feature, on a module. Did you go through that Or and you had spent more time at McKinsey, right? So
Yeah.
how did you deal? Did you even had that as an issue?
Yeah.
That am I working on important enough stuff?
Yeah.
Let's say at Amazon or at I2, which I joined.
Yeah.
And
No,
how
it's
did
a
you
fair
deal with-
point. I didn't think of it that way. It's a fair point. It definitely humbles your ego for sure. I think that's absolutely true. In McKinsey, I used to work with present to CEOs very regularly, whereas here I was part of a big company working on a small product area, which wasn't like top of mind for the CEO all the day. No, that's true. I think again, it's a mindset shift where it's more about not that whether your work has a lot of visibility. It's more about whether you're building the right thing, and whether it is actually creating impact on the ground. So just being able to see that difference, I think also it took me some time to realize it. But once I realized that, look, sometimes you'll work on product areas which are high visibility. Sometimes they won't be, right? Not everything can be high visibility and important for the CEO all the time. But it's about constant learning the skill. I think honing the craft, I think, is probably more important than vying for visibility. Because ultimately, over a long enough period of time, your competence as a product manager will sort of be more important than whether you worked on very high visibility things, right? So,
and the other maybe if you have to synthesize, you've been in a consulting org, you've been in large orgs as a product manager, then a smaller company and startup and all. What advice will you give to, let's say, somebody who's coming from large company wanting to join a startup? What should they be aware of, as in what to look out for
yeah.
as they're making these transitions? I've personally seen sometimes they work, sometimes people from these businesses just struggle to adjust to a small company environment.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I've seen that as well. With now, I've had so many hundreds of PMs, I've lost count. No, that's true. And I think there are 3-4 different things to assess when you're trying to join a startup. I think one is definitely whether the mission of the startup, the industry in which they're in, is that exciting to you. And I think different things are exciting to different people. Some people like being in like a B2C e-commerce type setting. Some people like being in more B2B, so enterprise software type setting. So there's no right or wrong answer, but just saying that, okay, the mission of this startup, like, do I find it interesting? Second is that startup ambitious enough around that mission? Have they done something bold in the past which gives you some data points to say, okay, these founders are ambitious, the company is ambitious? I think that's sort of one thing to be clear about. And the second thing, which is probably the most important one, is startups, depending on what stage they're in, often they're chaotic. But even amidst that chaos, whether there is strategic clarity on where that startup wants to go, being able to assess that is very critical. This is a mistake I also made earlier when I tried my hand at an early stage startup. I realized that while the mission was good, but the strategic clarity and the focus on building the right product wasn't there as much. So just being able to, again, assess that by talking to people in that company, etc., doing some reference checks on the founders, etc., you'll get that sense, saying, okay, is the company having strategic clarity? Are they going broadly in the right direction? They'll always course correct, but at least is that going in the right direction? I think that's the second one. The third one, also very underrated, is execution muscle. See, a lot of startups, and this has been glorified a little bit, unfortunately. Startups are chaotic, so everybody does everything, so anything goes, right? In reality, that may be true for very early stage startups, but any startup which is at series B, C, D, you will see that the best startups of that universe are the ones whose execution muscle is strong. So operating processes are slightly mature, there's a clear management structure, there's a cadence of reviews and bunch of things that they do to execute well. Right? Because ultimately that execution is what gives you the edge in the market. So just being able to see a little bit around whether that execution muscle is there or not, I think that's the third element. The fourth element, this I've again seen personally, is talent density. Like, does that company attract great talent, right? And do they have a high performance bar inside, right? And you will often be surprised at how many so-called well-funded startups there are who actually don't have this, right? They don't have a high-performance culture. Maybe the talent that they hire is just a function of hiring quickly versus hiring the right people. So that is the other thing, right? If you're able to figure out, okay, where are all the smart people going, right? And if they're going to a certain startup, then you'll realize that maybe that's a good one. So I would use these 3-4, right? So mission, strategic clarity, talent density, execution muscle. I think these are 4 pillars to evaluate if you're serious about joining a startup.
No, the talent density part is interesting. Another way, at least we also get founders coming from some of these large startups. One of the questions I always have is, in that particular company, how long on an average people stick around, right? It just tells you about so much about the culture of that business. There are companies where if somebody's worked like 2 years, it's an achievement. And then there are companies where people spend like 5, 6, 7 years of their lives.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it does tell you a lot about culture of these companies. Given that you spent more than 8 years in PM orgs, running PM orgs, there is always this question on product management on how much is it driven by consumer insight, going to the field, talking to customers, versus gut instinct of the PM as to what their customers want or don't want. Like, what side of the coin will you lie? Are there different cases in which different approaches work?
Yeah, I think I've come to believe now that at least product management is both art and science. A percentage distribution can probably vary. Maybe it's 60-40, 60% science, 40% art, maybe. But it's definitely not 100% on either direction. So that I've come to understand. And I think different factors determine it. I think one is, see, if you have an established product and if you want to incrementally improve it, then it's definitely science, which means that, like for example, in Meesho, we have a core e-commerce platform, it's doing well. Now, if you have to increase conversion then, right, by 5%, or you want to increase activation by 10%, whatever. If you have problems like that, then it is more towards science, which means that you look at data, you see where people are dropping off in the funnel, you try to optimize it, you run an A/B experiment, you improve. So this is science, right? And for doing the science part, you need to look at data, you need to talk to consumers, etc., and you'll get a fairly good answer. But there are many examples where it is not so much science, which means when you're launching something completely new, right? For example, as an e-commerce platform, if one of the things that we are trying in Meesho, which is working well now, is short video based commerce, right? Now, this is a very new paradigm in e-commerce. Like if you go and ask a customer, hey, like I'm going to show a video, do you like shopping through the video better than shopping through a regular listing? I don't think you'll get a very good answer on either direction, right? So they'll give you a middling answer. They'll say, yeah, this is okay, that's okay. So it is not science then, right? And there is no data anywhere of any company which will even prove, because this short video commerce hasn't worked in India for any commerce platform. There is no data. So these are the places where it has to be a little bit vision driven. Here, for example, the way we thought about it is saying, look, what are these consumers spending their daily time on? Which apps are they spending? Like Instagram, YouTube Shorts. What are they doing in that? And a lot of inspiration for shopping is coming through that, which is not captured in any funnel today, which is again by sort of seeing what's happening. And then you connect the dots and then you build this product. Now, this is again a very, you can call it a bit intuition driven. There are some insights, but it's still, there is no very strong science to say this will work. And many of these things, by the way, also tend not to work as well, right? It is just that the big path breaking 0 to 1 products tend to be more art than science. And that's why in the 0 to 1 phase of any startup, people call it black magic, right? I mean, and that term is used to describe the fact that, okay, there is some founder who has some vision and a hypothesis. There is no data that will ever tell you that's true. If you go and talk to customers, they also may not tell you all the answers. But you still build a product, you iterate, etc. Right? So I think, yeah, it's art, it's science. It's science is when you're incrementally improving a big existing product. It's art if you're trying to build something 0 to 1, which has no data validation backing it.
Very interesting. Now, obviously, I'm sure you made a lot of important decisions across these 8-10 years of operating career. If one were to pick one decision that had a positive business impact and one in hindsight that you would like to change,
yeah,
what would those be?
Yeah, I think the many examples, maybe I'll pick two from Meesho itself. I think the one which had the biggest impact is the one that we spoke about earlier, the B2C e-commerce shift. That was a very ambiguous decision. Obviously, it was also a big founder-led decision as well. So that had a huge impact, right? There we were going by what we were seeing consumers tell us and where we imagined e-commerce could go versus sort of continuing to protect the current business. I think that definitely had a huge positive impact. The other one, which actually in hindsight I would change that decision or rethink it, is in Meesho also a couple of years back, we sort of said, look, there is this live streaming based e-commerce that is taking off a lot in China, Taobao, etc., getting lots of e-commerce sales through that. this will definitely work in Indian context, so let's make it work, right? And obviously, you always rationalize it by some trends and this and that. And we sort of said, look, we'll make it work. So we launched a live streaming commerce platform. We invested behind it. We gave lots of discounts and we tried running it, but it didn't work, right? And in hindsight, the learning from that is, hey, while there are outside in parallels, every geography is different, every consumer segment is different. So you will have to figure out whether it works in this context or not. And if it doesn't work for some time, then you need to iterate, pivot out of it. And which we have done now recently, where we're now focusing on short video-based commerce and not live commerce, which actually is working much better. But I think in hindsight, it took us a lot of time to be intellectually honest to accept that. Whereas initially we were carried away by some of the outside and sort of stuff. So I think that's another decision I would change probably in hindsight.
Thanks for some very interesting story sharing. Ready for a few rapid fire questions?
Sure, let's go for it.
If you have to pick one product company globally, including India, that you look up to, which one would that be and why?
Yeah, the answer is easy. I think Apple. And I've been a big fan of all the Apple products for a long time. I think to me, the biggest, the thing that inspires the most is the Steve Jobs' belief and which is now carried through is also the fact that great user experience actually can be a great sort of business as well. And there are many companies which sort of don't think of business that way, saying that user experience, UX design is going to be my differentiator. There are a very handful of those companies in the world.
From my understanding is that you are also a very avid book reader. You know, if there are one or two books that you would recommend founders should read, benefit from, which one would those be?
Yeah, I think I have a long list, but I'll pick maybe a couple of business books and non-business ones as well. I think in the business books category, there's lots written. To me, the one that still stands out the most is 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. I think that book has inspired me the most in the business category, largely because of the sort of contrarian insights, which are also true, right? The fact that you have to avoid competition, right? And not try to follow the herd mentality in business. I don't like the classic product management books, but this one I think is very interesting. This is written by a software engineer who worked at Apple called Ken Kosienda. It's called Creative Selection. So this actually details the product development process at Apple. How do they build products, right? It goes into the depths of it and it's very fascinating. You will understand what it takes to build a great product, the amount of iteration that is needed, the discussion, debate that is needed, the attention to detail that is needed, right? All of that, I think it captures in a great way. So I think these are some business books. Outside of business book, I'm a big follower of spirituality and philosophy related books. I think it's this book called Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. This is a German author. So Siddhartha in some ways draws parallels to Gautam Buddha's life and journey. And the biggest, I think, takeaway from that book, at least for me, was always about sort of how to let go of things in life and still sort of pursue what you want, not get sort of bogged down by all the pressures that you feel. How do you experience a sense of freedom in what you're doing? I think there are many interrelated concepts in that book, which I think is a great read. It's very deep. That's why every time you read, you will learn more.
One thing that differentiates founders from successful professionals.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We always talk about founders' mindset, and I've tried to distill it into specifics. I think the maybe two things I would pick as the biggest differentiators. I think one is the ability to take big risks. I think most founders, I've worked with some exceptional ones, are always around fulfilling a vision they have in their mind, and no risk is big enough for them to take to fulfill that, right? So I think just that very big risk-taking ability is less so in professionals, more in founders. And it is not just about starting the company, but it is also about the pivots and all of the things that we spoke about earlier. Everywhere, it's always a big risk, right? So just being able to take that big risk, I think, is definitely one. Second, I think, is a very deep sense of ownership about everything in the company. Like every problem is a founder's problem in some sense in a startup, right? So being obsessed about all of those problems and being the person who sort of thinks about all of them, how to get them resolved, even if you're not doing it yourself, but somebody else is doing it, but you're still always thinking about it. So just that obsession and ownership, I think, is the other one, which probably is much, much more in founders.
One person that you know and has had the biggest influence in your professional life.
Yeah, I think it definitely has to be my wife, Monomita. I think she is also had a similar career trajectory to me. She was a consultant and she's a product leader now. And the many things I've learned from her, one, I think probably the biggest one is even while having a very sort of maybe high pressure, high visibility, stressful job, how do you still balance the time that you spend with family and things that are important outside of work as well? And quite counterintuitively, that time that you spend outside of work with family and balancing personal needs also makes you a better professional. This is something that I only realized much later in life. I was too obsessed with work and just focused on that. But when I actually started balancing, I actually became much better at work as well. So just being able to balance your time and with sort of your personal interests, etc., also makes you better professional. This is something I learned from her.
Got it. And with the last question from our side, one common myth about startups that you like to debunk?
Yeah, there are many myths. I think the biggest one I think I was referring to earlier, which is that, hey, startups are chaos, like anything goes, everybody does everything, right? It's all throwing darts in the dark. I think there is that little bit of this myth. This may be true in the very early stage, like literally if the startup was founded a week back, yes, it may feel like that. But any startup which has reached, if you're not product market fit, but even is in that direction, I think their ability to have some version of a management operating system or process which helps in seamless execution, I think that is often missed or underrated by most people who try to join startups, and people feel that, okay, it's just about moving fast and doing something, but going in the right direction, having some like lightweight process. I'm not talking about process in the sense of bureaucracy, but something which helps you execute repeatably, I think is
Actually, I
less
feel
well
that is
understood.
important in success of the startup itself.
Yeah,
I think if you
absolutely.
don't have that clarity, no process,
Correct.
then it is actually like keep on throwing
Yeah,
darts and hope one of them will work.
yeah,
But this is so helpful, Kirti. I think we talked about a variety of stuff about e-commerce, why you need 3 platforms, and what will quick commerce do. How do you work as a product leader? The transition from consulting to operating roles. Thanks for coming on the show. Hopefully, we'll get your wife also in one of the podcasts. But thanks for coming and spending time with us.
no, it was a great conversation, Rahul. Thanks for having me.